It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
All right. Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host, and we covered a couple of other topics this morning. We're into our third segment. We covered the Obamacare's epic fail and why that is a disaster for America, and the long-term goals and ranges of that project, which is ultimately to not provide health care, but to contain and maintain control over a population that when you have 20% of the entire GDP of a country under control, you can do an enormous amount of damage. Not to mention the fact that by instituting a national health care policy, they are privy to all of the information that is your personal information, which gives them an opportunity to utilize that information against you. You know, you've heard me say it before. They're building dossiers on every American. Between healthcare and the NSA, there's nothing that you have, no level of privacy anymore in any way, shape, or form that conforms to your life, period, right? If they can track your phone use, if they can track your email, if they can track your internet searching, if they can track all of the devices that you've gotten, including the GPS devicing on your phone, and then they have access to your entire health care record and all your financial records. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, there isn't a whole lot left. I mean, short of plugging a jack into the side of your head to listen to what you're thinking, there's not much left to the imagination, is there? So what the health care program is really about is control. We also talked about GPS and the recent court case that rules that, yes, law enforcement must have a warrant, and that GPS, if instituted without a warrant, is a violation of your Fourth Amendment right against illegal search and seizure unless they have a probable cause warrant from a court. It's a good ruling. However, it leaves a lot of things unanswered, including, not the least of which is, how do you stop the NSA from tracking us? Because this doesn't apply to the NSA. Big problem. In other words, it's a ruling that leaves a loophole big enough to drive the state of Maine through. Okay. This topic is going to be the International Monetary Fund and their plan, and when you hear this, it's going to flip your wig. The International Monetary Fund is pushing a plan to plunder the global wealth in a brand new report. This is their fiscal monitoring report. It's a brand new report that just came out in October. They're calling it taxing times. I mean, man, the hubris of these people is just astounding. This is a brand new report that came out this month. The International Monetary Fund is outlining schemes on how big spending governments that have these out-of-control debts like right, $17 trillion in debt, which now exceeds our gross domestic product, how those countries can plunder the wealth of their taxpayers or their see, they think of you as a subject. I think of you as a citizen. But irrespective of whichever term you use, how those governments can siphon the wealth off of their subjects to pay off their debts. And they're talking about utilizing higher taxation and outright confiscation of anything that you have that's a positive wealth asset. Now, we just saw this happen in the bank in Cyprus as an example. By the way, it happened in Hungary as well. What they said is anybody who had a balance in the bank in Cyprus that was over 100,000, well, they use euros, but anybody who had a balance over 100,000, they could step in and take 40%. Really? And they used that money to pay off the bank's debt. And then what they gave you was shares in the bank. So they said, okay, listen, you've got $400,000 in the bank. So you're over the $100,000 threshold. So that means that there's $300,000 there that we can tax. And what we're going to do is we're going to take 40% of that $300,000 or 120 grand. We're going to take that and we're going to give you shares in the bank. Forcing you to buy shares in a bank that for all intents and purposes is in default, or they wouldn't be doing this. Now, it's not voluntary. You didn't have an option or an opportunity to say, I don't want to do that. And what they did is they froze your account to bar you from getting the money out before they could do this. The International Monetary Fund is doing the same thing, but now they're talking about doing it on a global scale. The goal is to prop up big government. And they want to do it by these asset confiscations. So, okay, just for the average Joe, they say, all right, here's what your net worth is. And your net worth, if it's positive, you're subject to being raped financially. Positive assets and positive net worth are defined very simply. You look at a balance sheet and you say, here's my debts and liabilities, right? Here's the money I owe. My mortgage, my car, my car payment. You take all the debts and liabilities that you have, your long-term liabilities, any bills you owe, anything that's out there, and you stack all that up and you say, I owe $267,000 collectively for my life. And in order to pay off everything and walk away scot-free, I'd have to come up with $267,000. Then they figure out the assets and they say, okay, well, your house is worth $310,000, and your car is worth you got a net equity value in that of $5,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is, or maybe no equity, whatever it is. They figure that out and they take into account your wedding ring and the barbecue grill in your backyard, and boom, they come up with this figure and say, okay, so you owe $367,000. You have $567,000, so therefore you are $200,000 into the positive net wealth category. You have a positive net wealth of $200,000. We're going to take a percentage of that. I mean, to me, this is so far outside the bounds of anything that anyone could accept. There is no justification for that. I don't care how you try to rationalize it. I don't care how you try to make it a logical, well-reasoned argument that has even a moral standing, which is, morals are so subjective that you can make them substitute for anything, right? There's no legal standard for it. There's no constitutional standard for it. There's no ethical standard for it. So they default down into the emotional, subjective morality argument. Because that's one that there's no rules. I mean, man, this is a stunning decision. Because what it means is that we are not just in a totalitarian situation in country A or country B or country C. We are in a totalitarian new world government that is being promulgated by the IMF, the International Monetary Fund. And they owe their allegiance not to nations, not to sovereign nations, not to people. They owe their allegiance to banks and governments. Here's their concern. People and their assets are mobile. In other words, you can take your money out of this bank and put it in that bank. You can have one account in this bank and another bank and another account in that bank. You could have assets in gold that nobody knows about. You might have assets in jewelry. You might have assets in, whatever. It doesn't even make any difference what it is. You get the idea. They're concerned about that because if you have the ability to keep assets hidden, then they can't identify exactly how much you own. But in this document, and listen, this is their official name for it, taxing times. They're not even hiding it, folks. The hubris of these people is so astounding, they're not even trying to hide it. They're proposing measures to prevent you from escaping from their clutches before they have the opportunity to fleece you. I mean, This is so over the top. If it wasn't in writing, and if it wasn't real, I would think this was the plot of a science fiction novel. They use, of course, debt-based currencies already that are fiat, right? In other words, they don't really exist. The Federal Reserve note is a debt. You're buying debt. Whatever you've got in your pocket is not really money. It's a black hole. These banks are bailed out by governments utilizing taxpayer money. And these same banks are the ones who are stepping up and saying it's not enough. They've got to bail us out of our mistakes in trading. I mean, J.P. Morgan just yesterday settled for $13 billion on a massive fraud investigation. $13 billion. And nobody's going to jail. As long as they pay their cut to the government, no sweat, no harm done, just a cost of doing business. And if you take into account central banks, you're talking about the Federal Reserve and the Bank of England and, all the central banks in the world. These banks are privately run cartels. They are nothing more than gangland thuggery in high-dollar suits. All of that is virtually ignored in the face of reality. What they're actually looking for is the ability to say that we can go out there and confiscate the wealth of the planet. And one of the ways that they want to try to do this is to do it on a scale that no one can escape. This article says it well. This is in the New American, by the way, and I encourage you strongly to go to the newamerican.com. This is the one of the best websites out there for finding information that the news media and the Ministry of Propaganda will not discuss with you. These are and listen, they cover a lot of the same stories, but they also talk about other things that you'll never hear about the news media. Now, the news media will say to you, well, we don't cover that story because it's too complicated for the average listener to understand. Hey, with all due respect, that's your problem. You should be educating the consumer. That's the purview of the press. If they're not smart enough to understand it, it's because you have been deleterious in your responsibility to educate the public. When I hear that argument out of the media, it inflames me, because it is the media's obligation to bring the story out to the public and make complex concepts easy enough for the average person to understand. They don't have to understand the minutia of how this works or that works, but they do have to get the general gist. And it is the press's obligation to be an educational force in the nation to notify people what's really happening so that they can either take action to either resist it or to abide by it, to buy into it, whatever the case may be. But when the media says, we don't tell you about that because that's way too far over your head, that is the press's fault for allowing it to get over your head. They had an obligation, and still do, to educate and inform. And they have failed in that duty, epically. In this case, this article points to the absurd and rising levels of government debt, as well as the increasing, listen to the phrases they use, income inequality. The IMF document suggests that there are few remaining options for desperate policymakers to explore. There are two methods that include, one, repudiating the public debt. Now, I'm going to tell you what that means in a moment. And then the other one is inflating it away by having privately owned central banks conjure up even more gargantuan amounts of fiat currency into existence at a level of interest. And both of these plots, of course, represent a massive transfer of wealth. Let me explain to you what they are. Repudiating the public debt would be the equivalent of our saying, you know what, we're going to say to China and Japan and everyone else who owns public debt, as part of our $17 trillion, we're going to say to them, you know what? The government in Washington did this. We didn't approve of it, and therefore we're not responsible for it. We're starting a brand new country, and it's going to be, 15 states in size, and we're separating ourselves. We're seceding away from the United States of America, and we're not responsible for any of that debt. We're not taking, we're 25 states out of 50. We're not accepting half of that debt and calling half of 17 trillion our responsibility. We're saying we didn't have any part of that debt. It's on you. Tough luck. Have a nice day. Goodbye. That's repudiating public debt. You refuse to pay it. You say it's not my debt. I had nothing to do with it, and I didn't approve it. That's one way to do it. By the way, third world countries do that all the time. But when a country the size of the United States does that, it has ripples that run throughout the entire financial system on a global scale. The second way to do that is by inflating it away. And inflation is a hidden tax. Because when inflation occurs, your financial value is essentially disintegrated. We've inflated the dollar now to the point where since 1905, the dollar has lost 90% of its purchasing power. 90%. The truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, it's not that gasoline has risen in price. Gasoline has not moved one iota. It's not that gold has gone up in price from $300 an ounce, which it was in, as early as 10 or 12 years ago, to $1,300 or $1,400 an ounce. It's not that a food, and let's just take ground beef as a perfect example, has gone from 99 cents a pound to $2.89 a pound. It's that the buying value of the dollar has declined. The food is the same price it always was. It just takes more of these dollars to buy it because there are more in circulation. In other words, there's more money available in circulation, and like everything else under supply and demand rules, these are the rules of physics. These are the rules of God and nature's God, okay? You can't change them. It's like gravity. And when you have a lot of something, the price drops. The value of that thing drops. When you have fewer of something, the price goes higher. Perfect example. If you want to go out and buy a bundle of apples, a basket of apples, a bushel. If you live in a place where apples are out of season, and there's very little of apples available, but apples are your favorite thing, you're going to go out and pay more to buy those apples because you want them and there's not many around, and the price goes up. On the other hand, when apple harvest season is here, every farmer's producing apples. There's no shortage, and so the price drops dramatically because you can go get apples anywhere. It's that simple, ladies and gentlemen. All these economists want to try to sit here and give you, 9 million lines worth of calculation to explain why it's all so complex. It's not. The simple truth is, when we print money, the value of the dollar drops because there's more of them in circulation. There's more apples available for everybody. It's that easy. Banking is not complex. When you try to scam the public, that's when banking becomes complex. Only because those people who are trying to pull the wool over your eyes and are playing the little shell game where it's your job to find the marble, they've got to make it complex in order for you to be buffaloed. Did you ever hear the term, if you can't baffle them with bullcrap, you dazzle them with your brilliance? That's exactly what this is. If they can't baffle you with their nonsense, then they will dazzle you with the brilliance of how they can do these wizardry, this monetary wizardry. Let me tell you something. You pull back the curtain, and Oz is a decrepit little old guy sitting in there who's got, there is no secret to this. One of the best books that you can get out there, and I've interviewed him, was by Griffin. He wrote that book called The Creature from Jekyll Island, and he explains the Federal Reserve and how it was created. But one of the most interesting aspects of the book is it's a great historical document because it really educates you about money and how it's created and how it's built and how the Federal Reserve takes money and creates wealth from nothing. In other words, the federal government issues an IOU, the Federal Reserve then takes that and adds zeros to their balance sheet. Well, it's an IOU. There's no real money created, but for all intents and purposes, then they print money off of it, and now there's more money in circulation, and therefore the price of money falls. It's an educational book, and I strongly encourage you to read it. It's not a story, but it is. It's not a boring textbook. It's not an academic, I can read 2 pages of this and it's the best sleeping pill I've ever had kind of book. It's actually quite interesting because it's a historical novel. Not a novel. It's a historical book that also gives you the explanation of how the Federal Reserve was created, who were the players, why were they involved, and what was the long-term ramifications of that Federal Reserve creation, and how under what nefarious what nefarious characters created it. And it also explains to you money and how it works. And so if you've ever even considered it, or you have an interest in money, I strongly encourage you to get a hold of that book. You can find it online. You can get it on Amazon, or you can get it on, in fact, we've got an Amazon link on our website that's got the book highlighted there. You can go to americasvoicenow.org, and in one of those Amazon ads, there's actually book titles I've kind of picked out for you. It's one of the best books that you can get out there. And, because it's a Joe Sixpack kind of education on finance. And I strongly encourage you to read it because it will really open your eyes to the multi-trillion-dollar scam that's being perpetrated on the entire planet by central banks. What you need to know is these central banks are privately owned. And and by inflating, when they inflate currency, they're the winners. They are like a sponge drawing wealth, siphoning wealth away from the public. And the truth is, that's not even fast enough for them. They can't even do it by inflation. So now what they want to do is this confiscatory 10% tax. And 10% is only a number thrown out. I mean, look, in their document, and there's a PDF link to the document in this article, they actually have the unmitigated gall to make the suggestion and to suggest that taxing property and transfers. I mean, this is their words right out of their report. Household wealth is very unequally distributed, even more so than income. In advanced economies, the top 10% own on average more than half of the wealth, up to 75% in the United States. It is arguably a better indicator of ability to pay than annual income, and indeed taxes on wealth and transfers have historically been a major source of revenue. Now, however, they yield very little, slightly under 2% of GDP on average in the OECD. Is this a revenue source that could be tapped? They're asking the question flat out there. Should we tax you based on the property and the real estate that you own and the transfers of money that you make? Who do these people think they are? It's unconscionable. It's beyond hubris. We now have a global, for all intents and purposes, dictatorship. And when you control money, when you control the flow of money, when you control the movement of money, when you control the assets and the transfers and the wealth, you control the world. People can sit there and make all the political justifications and decisions and votes they want. And it has no bearing on the reality. Rothschild was famously quoted, and I don't know whether I've heard this quoted attributed to him and many others, but basically the quote is real simple, and it stands to reason, irrespective of who made it, it's true. Give me control of the money supply, and I care not a whit who makes the law. Give me the control of a nation's monetary system, and I care not a whit who makes the laws. You know why? Because they're easily bought and sold, and they will do his bidding based on his ability to influence them with wealth and power. Giving the International Monetary Fund, giving the World Trade Organization, giving the Federal Reserve, and giving central banks around the world the ability to inflate and deflate currencies, to, in every inflation, create wealth, and then in every deflation, draw that wealth off for their own purposes, is unconscionable. And it's unethical, it's immoral, it's not functional under any rules of God or nature's God. It's confiscatory, and quite frankly, unless the world at some point in time rises up, we're the last pillar of liberty and freedom on the planet, the United States of America. Without us there holding up the roof for all intent, and we're a single pillar, holding up the roof of liberty and freedom, which is vastly shrinking right now, the world will fall into a dark age, financial, economic, a spiritual, a social dark ages that may, for all intents and purposes, last hundreds, if not even thousands of years. We are the only influence, the only pillar holding up the roof of liberty and freedom on the world. And in the last 5 to 10 years, in the last 25 years, that pillar has been chipped away at by axes and hatchets and sledgehammers until there's only a slender little base of it that's holding up that, and it's beginning to ripple and waver. When a strong wind comes, it starts to crumble and crack. We are in desperate days, ladies and gentlemen, and we are in desperate trouble. Educate and understand. Educate yourself to understand what's going on around you. Be situationally aware. Pericles said, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics doesn't take an interest in you. Remember, these people are making decisions that affect your life. And by ignoring it and pretending that the nebulous they will do the right thing, you are ensuring, in fact, you are virtually guaranteeing your own demise. You've been listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I am the host here. Please find our website where you can gather all kinds of great information. You can find us by going to americasvoicenow.org. You can also email me directly by Mike at America's Voice Now. I'd like your feedback on this topic, this segment. When you do it, just reference the segment on put in the date, today's date, 10/23, and then reference the Federal Reserve issue. I want to hear your feedback. I mean, I see it on YouTube and stuff, but I'd like to hear directly from you. Help me find those topics that are of interest to you that I can and if this has been helpful to you, tell me so. If it hasn't been helpful to you, tell me so and tell me why, so I can improve. Perfect. AmericasVoiceNow.org. Email me at Mike at AmericasVoiceNow.org. We'll be right back.